Now to part 3 of the presentation on electoral integrity and gender, looking at the prospect for corruption-free elections in Nigeria. This third part of my presentation is on what can be done. And it is necessarily an ongoing project, hardly finished. I will draw upon the experiences of other countries that have had more success than we have in our dear country. So what can be done? Luckily, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are successes that we can draw from, including from fellow African countries that have increased women's political participation and succeeded in promoting, quote, gender equality and women's participation in the electoral processes. First, I think we must have the political will to use these successful strategies. We must also adopt general principles that guide this kind of interventions. The following guiding principles try to suggest what could be done in terms of policies and programs that would make our elections more effective, more meaningful in terms of meeting the democratic aspirations that we are expressing by engaging in them. They would also produce results that would encourage more political participation on an equal basis by all genders in our politics and our elections. And I draw from ACE's report from this year, 2022. So, of course, we need guiding principles. We also need strong laws and institutions. We must remove all barriers to women's political participation. We must support women's full political participation and empower women to be involved in every part of our electoral process, all through the electoral cycle. As you know, these things are they're easier said than done, but that should not prevent us from doing them. Also, the reason why these things are hard to pull off in a comprehensive way is that multiple obstacles are faced by women in the electoral process. Women, as we have said before, play multiple and sometimes overlapping roles in the political process. During the electoral cycle, they could be candidates, or they could be just card-carrying members of political parties. They could also be independent political activists. Women are, of course, part of the voting public. Some of them are electoral administrators. Some of them belong within civil society organizations, and they represent these organizations during the electoral cycle. Some of these civil society representatives could be electoral observers. They could be mediators. They could be human rights defenders. They could be social activists. Some women are candidates, as I said before, and they need support to ensure that they participate in a free and fair process where there's no violence, there's no aggression towards them, and no measures are taken to limit their participation. Also, let's kind of look at women as voters. When women are voters, you know, all of us live within a social context, and our social context remains highly gendered. So there are expectations about what women ought to do and what they ought not to do, what are the natural things people believe for men to do, even though those things are social constructions. We make them up, but they become reified and they influence the way in which social norms are developed, how social values are expressed, and all the ways in which people say some things are responsibilities for men, some things are responsibilities for women. There are also stereotypes, and there are discriminatory practices and behaviors that flow from these gendered expectations within society. And they do affect women as voters. Well, there's also requirements in many systems for women, for voters to have identification. So in order to get this identification, people may have to jump through some very difficult hoops, and there may be, logistical problems in terms of getting to the place where you get your identity card. Those impossible logistics of accessing registration points and also getting, good information on exactly what to do could prevent some voters from registering. And there may also be information deficits about voting. There may be deficits about the processes that would be followed during the elections, and people may be mixed up or unclear about their political rights. This would affect their capacity to participate on an equal footing with people who have good access to information and who understand what their political rights are. There's also, in many cases, inadequate civic education, where voters' education programs may not be as widely available as one would want. This is something that could disadvantage those who are already marginalized within that system. Another thing that could prevent women from exercising their franchise rights is when voting stations are located in places that are hard to get to. There's also the fact that, the secrecy of the ballot could actually be compromised, and people are then constrained to vote in ways that those who are able to spy on what they're doing want. And we do know that votes are bought, and people are required sometimes to snap a photo of their ballot to show the people that are going to pay them money for their votes. Sometimes family and community members pressure people to vote in ways that do not express that particular voter's, conscience in terms of whom they want to vote for. There's also identification requirements that may violate people's right to privacy. And, some of these social norms may also present politics as an unethical and immoral terrain, so that, good people are sometimes constrained from participating robustly. There's family, community, and electoral violence that could affect women as voters and prevent them from exercising their franchise. Now, when women are electoral administrators, the same gendered expectations and norms that we've mentioned before, and the values that flow from them, and the constructions that society has made in terms of what is appropriate to men and women, can affect people. And women are stereotyped in a certain way. There's discrimination against them that may prevent them from being effective in positions of authority as electoral administrators. Also, there may be, it is well known that we still don't have parity in terms of the staff of election management bodies in Nigeria. Particularly, the decision-making positions are dominated by men. Then, the leadership structures may either consciously or unwittingly exclude women. There are also few opportunities for upward mobility for women. There's poor work-life balance that may then encourage women to step away from more responsible positions at work, because it is interfering with their ability to do the caregiving and the nurturing activities that they're expected to undertake in their families. Also, there's still inadequacy in terms of the gender training and sensitization for electoral staff. There also, there's the situation that there's inadequate regulations and processes to address issues of sexual harassment and intimidation within electoral management boards also. Now, violence may also occur both within and outside electoral management boards. Within civil society, as civil society representatives who are electoral observers, mediators, human rights defenders, and social activists, women also face the same gendered expectations from social norms, values, and constructions that flow from them on appropriate responsibilities and functions that women should perform. There's stereotypical responses from society, there's discrimination. Also, we have situations of few women, particularly in decision-making positions. The leadership structures may exclude women except in women-specific NGOs. There's violence within and outside the organization that could prevent people from being effective in their work. So the ways in which constraints on women marginalize them in political careers, in professional development, include the glass ceiling, where within the organization women are, they face obstacles to moving up the ladder and occupying high positions of authority, where they have equal pay, equal perquisites of office, and working conditions that are favorable. Women could also face a glass wall that entails horizontal segregation that puts women in the lower and minor roles, puts men in the higher and major roles, and denies women access to certain fields, certain positions of power. And this becomes normalized. Then there's the cement ceiling, where the barrier is of a psychological nature. Women may refuse to accept leadership positions because they see their work-life balance being thrown out of alignment, and they can't balance the work that they do within their family and work that they do as professionals. So they say, well, you know, I don't want more responsibility. There's the sticky floor. The sticky floor is a cultural barrier that pushes women to deal with domestic chores and caregiving responsibilities, and this hinders and slows down their professional development. So ACE in the 2022 study suggests 8 broad guiding principles that could be used to try to begin addressing these situations. The first is the human rights-based approach. Second, inclusion. Third, participation. Fourth, transparency. Fifth, impartiality. Seventh, integrity. And eighth, effective collaboration. There's a ninth one, do no harm. So a human rights approach contributes to the recognition of inequalities, discrimination, and unbalanced power relations in the electoral process, end quote. It involves ensuring that no one is left behind, as we all are saying in affirmation of the SDGs. We're not going to leave anybody behind. And then all stakeholders, especially those who are already disempowered, marginalized, and excluded, they are supposed to be brought in and equitable conditions created to ensure that they can participate. There's also the need for, mechanisms and strategies that foreground gender equality and women's political participation in the electoral process. So everybody's civil and political rights ought to be respected, and their gender identity should not impede the recognition and extension of the rights to them. They should be helped to overcome barriers that stand in their way that prevent them from participating. They're also supposed to receive assistance to overcome the barriers to their participation. So leveling the playing field is a primary agenda. In terms of inclusion, it is important to have diversity, because without full diversity, we cannot have true democracy. We should have everybody able to participate in elections and in all aspects of the electoral cycle, so that there's no violence against them, there's no discrimination against them, there's no barriers that prevent them from participating, whether it's based on gender, identity, or ethnicity, or sexual orientation, or class, or age, or disability, or status, or religion, or anything else. Everybody must be able to participate. And there should be a demonstrable desire that people feel that they're not being left behind. Now, participation. This means empowering men and women to participate and play their desired role within the political system, in communities and families, all through the electoral cycle. So whether they're voting or they're candidates for elections, or they want to speak their mind and express their opinions, or they want to be an officer in an electoral management body, they should be able to participate without any impediment. Peaceful protest and also observing the elections should also be open to all. Transparency is important. This entails employing methods, mechanisms, and strategies that ensure that there's gender equality and women's political participation in a way that everybody understands. It should be open and clear to all. Everything that needs to be done should be easy to understand. And everybody within the process is expected to be accountable and to be amenable to explaining why they have done what they have done when questioned. Impartiality, transparency. Okay, so impartiality is also important. So the process is supposed to treat all participants the same. And it is supposed to then offer enablement to those who are marginalized and discriminated against. And also fairness, not giving advantages to any that are not given to others is important. So all the participants should be ensured that their rights are respected, that the system treats them in a fair way and with equality, and, you know, it is a user-friendly system. Integrity is important, and everybody that is participating should be ethical. They should follow the rules in a transparent way. They should be accountable. They should be fair. They should be impartial. And there should be efforts to build trust and confidence in the system. Effective collaboration is also important so that inclusive processes are devised with as wide a population of participants as possible. Accountability, fairness, transparency, impartiality, these are not just words. They're principles that should run through the whole system, geared especially towards including the marginalized and excluded. Now, do no harm is important. So gender equality is important, and everything that, whether it is social or economic or political, that impedes full participation is supposed to be eliminated. And this is a process that takes, sometimes long-term commitment. So if we want to promote gender equality and women's political participation, we must always look for best practices, especially in countries in this African continent that are doing better. And we integrate those best practices into our modus operandi. So, in essence, there's need for legal and policy frameworks for meaningful gender equality and women's participation in the electoral process. So the frameworks, I mentioned some before. Broadly, they're international conventions, declarations, and agreements. There are peace agreements, there's our constitution, there are electoral laws, there are political party laws, there are political and campaign finance legislation, that's part of usually the electoral laws. There's the electoral management bodies, regulations, and procedures. There's political parties' internal rules and regulations. There are codes of conduct. There are gender equality laws and legislation that address violence against women in politics and elections. So all the international obligations that our country has signed on to should be respected. And they were enumerated earlier. Let me just specifically mention the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the 1979 Convention. There's also a lot of UN declarations, and they include the United Nations Economic and Social Council Resolution 1990, the Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action from 1995, the Security Council Resolution 1325 on Women, Peace and Security, the Commission on the Status of Women Agreed Conclusions of 2006, the General Assembly Resolution 66-130 on Women and Political Participation. And the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 5 on gender equality. There's also a need to include all populations, regardless of gender, regardless of sexuality, regardless of socio-economic category. And we need also to have an understanding that the legal frameworks that exist affect gender equality. We need to know that there are international human rights instruments and they have an effect on women's participation and the respect for gender equality in the electoral process. Now, there's a lot to do, which resonates with the many rivers to cross in the title of my talk. Part of the things that need to be done involves strengthening all the legal frameworks and the institutional frameworks, making sure that the election management bodies, that they work and they're fit for purpose, and that they foreground respect for gender equality in all parts of what they do. There's also a need to enforce the laws that are on the books so that, we're not just talking the talk, we're walking the walk. So electoral integrity is possible, and gender equality is possible. Now, what needs to be done is demonstrable commitment to ensuring that truly we leave no one behind, that we are committed, that we are effective in implementing all the measures that we have claimed that we have commitment to. And this is possible. So it is a struggle. It is possible. It can be done. Thank you very much.